Welcome back to the Republic of Sikhistan, and it's just me this week. Fitz has taken a diplomatic visit to our distant neighbours in Austria to ignite the revolution via some skiing, so it's just me today, and I am answering the questions in a training vlog I did on Monday. So I said if you guys ask some questions, I'd answer them. Now, rather than just replying to that person in the comments, a lot of more people will get benefit from me just answering them in this video. More people will see it, and if you have more questions, I'll be more than happy, delighted, enthused if you ask them in the comments, and I'll make another video and answer those questions for you. If you have any follow-up questions on any of the things we talk about today, I will also answer those. So this is from the training vlog, slamming pre-workout minerals, but of course it was but a teaspoon of salt. So first up we have Kick Nish Old School. He's saying, what would you say your heart rate is on the cardio sessions? Are you 70-80% or 60 to 70%? So I've done two different kind of cardio sessions in the last few weeks and experimented with one and the other. So the first one I experimented was kind of interval training, so high intensity for 30 seconds and then resting between 90 and 30 seconds depending on how I was feeling on that particular day or what progression I was moving through. Obviously I started with longer rest times and periodized in slightly to the lower rest times. For those, my heart rate would have been closer to 80 or maybe 85%. I would have been going as hard as I could on the stationary bike, on the turbo trainer. If I would have been doing on a assault bike or an air bike, I would have probably gotten closer, much closer to my max heart rate, or the max I could possibly do for an extended period of time over 30 seconds. For the low intensity steady state cardio, which I've been doing recently, the heart rate in those is, I'm not sure exactly, but it would be very low. It would be something in the low 60s or 70s. Why did I change from one to the other? Initially, I just wanted to see what the interval style training would be doing for jiu-jitsu, how it would affect it. We'll be doing some conditioning programs, and we just wanted to try and experiment with specific things. Obviously, we've done a lot of conditioning with people before, but I think unless you've done these things yourself, it doesn't give you quite the same value in your research. So we just want to try different things. So then I was doing the low intensity steady state. I would say we're looking at 60 to 70% of max heart rate, but definitely no further beyond that. They are quite low intensity. The pace would be very much talking pace in general, if you want to kind of describe it in that manner or gauge it off that manner. First 10-12 minutes, there's essentially no sweat. It might be 15 to 20 minutes, then I would be sweating mildly. So they're the kind of metrics I'm using. I don't have a heart rate monitor for that. I preferred the low intensity steady state cardio, as we talked about in a different video recently. It's just less fatiguing. I find it easier to do, so just doing them requires much less concentration. I can do other things while I'm sitting on the bike. I can do work, I can watch a video. There's other things that I can do, and when I get off them, I'm not kind of fatigued. It doesn't affect my training as much. Not that it affected it either way, to be honest, the whole amount, but the low intensity steady state cardio was certainly less fatiguing. The calories you burn from either one generally works out the same, going by most of the research. So you might do more work in a shorter period of time, but when you do that longer low intensity steady state cardio, you end up burning approximately the same calories. So it's kind of depending on what you want to do, what you prefer, and what you're able to afford. For example, intense sprints in intervals would be far more fatiguing muscularly, for example, compared to stationary bike low intensity steady state cardio. So I found that the low intensity steady state cardio work actually carries over a little bit better to the jiu-jitsu. The muscular endurance part of the interval training doesn't really give you that same kind of carryover to jiu-jitsu from a stationary bike. Running intervals, I think, would be quite better, and it's something that either Dara will try or I will try. I probably won't be trying weightlifting, but Dara might give them a go, and we'll see what gives you that best kind of carryover. So for the low intensity, to sum it up, very low, mild, just a moderate pace. Talking pace is usually how a lot of coaches will describe that when they talk about conditioning, so I'd be able to carry out a conversation for the whole of those 15 minutes. Then I'll try and do something between 7 and 12 of those sessions a week, depending on what I'm doing in those particular sessions. So Scott Esri is up next. He's saying, I've been trying more magnesium, potassium and choline, but not sure if it's making much of a difference. So I'm not a huge fan of supplementing with vitamins and minerals unless you have a specific reason. For example, your conversion of choline in your brain might not be adequate. You may have reasons for that. It may be genetic. It could be other issues. It could have been, damage you sustained, inflammation, something like that, let's say, and you couldn't adequately convert choline. Then maybe in a specific case, it doesn't have to be choline, it could be any number of vitamin and minerals. If maybe you've gotten some blood tests done, for example, maybe you can't methylate your own B12 and you may need to take methylated B12 via intramuscular injections or, general supplementation, oral supplementation. I think that makes perfect sense and you should definitely do that to optimize your life. Some people, for example, during winter can't adequately produce enough vitamin D in their bloodstream via either maybe genetic predisposition to not utilize the adequate light, or the UV rays during the winter time are not adequate enough and they're not able to expose themselves enough due to environmental factors to produce that vitamin D. So in those scenarios and circumstances, I think it's definitely a good idea. If you're just generally supplementing with electrolytes, vitamins, minerals, all of these things, I'm not really a huge fan of it. Certainly self-experimentation within reason, as long as things are not particularly dangerous or likely to be harmful, it does provide valuable information to you and see how you feel. But in general, I think, for example, getting any of these vitamins and minerals is almost always better getting these intakes from food. So it can be quite easily to excessively over supplement with these, or in general you might even be supplementing in a form that's not very available. So for example, if you look at magnesium, there is a variety of different forms of magnesium. There's oxide, chloride, glycinate, L-theanine. There's so many different forms of magnesium that have different impacts in different forms. Citrate, for example, there's just a variety of different ones that have different qualities. One of them, for example, would literally be to help you with constipation. So if you're taking that form of magnesium, you wouldn't really be absorbing a huge amount of that magnesium, and thus you would just be literally shitting it out, but you may need it for that particular case. So really the emphasis should be getting these through an adequate dietary solution, and whatever that might be for you, whether you're a vegan or whether you're a carnivore or anything in between, I think you're much better off getting these from food. So for example, let's look at salt. So the mechanisms by how you regulate these intakes of vitamins and minerals, dietary nutrition and dietary nutrients are a lot more effective when you get them from your nutrition. So when we look at salt, the regulatory mechanism by which salt is calibrated for when you're eating it is by taste. So if something tastes too salty, it's a very simple mechanism. You're not going to eat it. There's too much salt in it. So if you calibrate how much salt you need by how tasty and palatable things are, then it is quite a simple mechanism. Something too much salt, it tastes unpalatable, you won't eat it. Interesting enough, for example, when we're balancing sodium and potassium-rich foods often taste better with sodium, and the more sodium we apply to them, the more palatable they are to us to a certain extent, and thus the more potassium we'll get from our diet due to more palatable foods. So vegetables, for example, high in potassium. Potatoes will have nearly 1 gram of potassium, so one medium-sized potato. If we salt this potato, we're getting more sodium into our diet, and it is making that potato more palatable. As we know, plain potato isn't the most delicious thing, and so when we add this sodium, we're getting a nice balance. We're kind of going as nature intended, I suppose. So we're getting a nice, specific, regulatory and very sustainable practice, and we're likely to get the cofactors we need with these particular vitamins and minerals. For example, certain vitamins and minerals are very difficult to absorb or will not be absorbed in the absence of dietary fats. So you may be taking things as an oral
stanozolol for 2 fucking years straight,
powdered supplement, and without the effect of dietary fat in addition to them, you may not be absorbing them. So there's a whole different host of these things which we're not really going to get into today. There's so much to look into, but in most circumstances, outside of a few specific cases and uses, I probably prefer to be getting things in the form of food, and following that, if you have specific needs or specific things that you find work very well for you and that they don't hurt you, then I think it's okay. But in general, I like to be getting things from our nutrition and from our food, and whatever way that is for you. Joshua Edwards is saying, what sort of exercise were you doing for your knee health? I'm just going to make a video on this because I think it'd be easier to show you the prehab and rehab and corrective exercise I'm doing at the moment, because there's quite a few of them, and I'll just talk you through the way I do them. Joe Wright is saying, is it bad or less productive to do good mornings with much more knee bend and the hips going back? That's how I always do. So There is 2 different ways that you can do good mornings, and it depends on what you're doing them for. So for if we are doing our weightlifters, you saw the way I did the good morning. So it was no knee flexion, and I was bending forward at the shoulder as much as possible and not sending my hips back. Now, if I was a powerlifter, I would do the more powerlifter-esque good morning, where I would slightly bend my knees, and then I would aggressively send my hips back as I sent my shoulders forward. And you get a different kind of loading of your ass and your hamstrings. Now, obviously, your hamstrings are involved in both of these, any flexion at the waist, but there is a good reason why you might do one or the other. So in weightlifting, the pull, first and second pull, we are sweeping our knees back in both lifts. In general, weightlifters find this quite difficult, especially in the clean. So we're at nearly 180 degrees full extension in our legs in the clean. And this specific good morning, where we keep our legs straight and we bend forward at the waist, will somewhat mimic and hopefully train similar muscles that we need for the clean and the snatch. Whereas if we're a powerlifter, you don't want to be moving back. You want your knees to be staying forward or as stationary as much as possible to ensure as much leg drive as possible, because we're not too worried about moving the barbell backwards off the ground. We're looking for a straighter bar pat, and thus these kind of good morning powerlifter style good mornings are more effective at encouraging this range of motion. Whereas if we were a powerlifter and we were doing very straight legged good mornings, it's possible we'd be ingraining the positions that we don't particularly want, and vice versa for our weightlifters. Interestingly enough, our weightlifters always have the issue with keeping their knees forward because they have a lot of quad dominant movements in their training, and our powerlifters are the opposite. They always have an issue with not keeping their knees forward. They find it very difficult. Anyone doing lots of deadlifts finds it very difficult to keep a full leg drive going and a lot of quad dominance in that pull, and they'll end up shifting their knees back and moving their shoulders forward, which is not what we want for powerlifting. So it's funny that we have these opposites, and it's very difficult for either one to do what they need to do. So depending on which one you are doing and which sport it is, I would accommodate your good morning slightly. Now, for example, the loading will change, the sets and reps will change. If you're doing the more weightlifting bent over or good morning style, the weightlifting one, you will use less weight certainly, as the angles are more severe and the pressures are different. For our powerlifting good morning, it is a little bit deeper and certainly be heavier, as the moment arm on our back is not as severe, still severe, so it's still very important to be aware of it, but you can get quite heavy with this, and I think it can be very beneficial for powerlifters depending on what their needs are to do this kind of good morning. So just pay attention to what you're doing. Riley Rice says, I always find myself staring at the toolbox in these training videos. Am I into rally? So I'm not into rally, certainly not in any active sense, but a lot of my family would have been very active, and at one point in growing up, I think maybe between 2 and 3 of my family members would have actively had some form of motorsport car, maybe rallying or hot rod, so it's certainly in the family. Churn Diesel says, I loaded up on sodium a little bit too much and developed a noticeable lump around my ankle. Cut my sodium back a little bit and it was gone in the day. So interesting enough, you can actually store sodium under the skin and in your skin cells. So it's a depository mechanism, which I think is quite interesting, and I wasn't aware of that until recently. So that may have been a cause of that. Patrick Miller saying, as a licensed and certified elastic band physician, he finds this intro very particularly hurtful. You're simply perpetuating the stereotype that elastic maintenance is some sort of pseudoscience. Educate yourself, be better. Dr. Springy Poof MD. Listen, everyone knows elastic band physicians are absolute spoofers. They know it's not a real thing. You're basically Scientologists, and I don't want to see you in my videos. The Laddie's Dad says, you can buy WHO spec oral rehydration salts for pretty cheap, and they're pretty effective in sorting hydration and electrolyte balance. So in that case, like I was talking about, unless I was doing a lot of ultra marathons or a lot of running and I was sweating excessively for a long period of time and I wasn't able to consume food, I'm not particularly a fan of these salt tablets. So again, we want to regulate these things through our food. For example, the sodium with taste is a very, very important one to ensure that we're getting as much as we need in that particular moment, in that particular day. So these salt hydration tablets, I'm not a huge fan because it's easy to overconsume certain amounts of these. Also in general, the ratios of electrolytes in these rehydration tablets are often very skewed towards like chloride and potassium. The sodium content will be very, very low. Sometimes you'll have like 250 milligrams of sodium per serving, which might be 2 or 3 tablets, which to be honest is quite piss poor. 01001 010010 is saying, I want to buy a Seek Strength hoodie. We don't have hoodies this time around, but we will next time because I want a hoodie too from Seek Strength. James is asking, do my squat stands have a particular style? No, they don't have a particular name. They're always just called squat stands. Anyone looking for these kind of squat stands, and this is very popular during the pandemic, if you find a fabricator or a welder or a manufacturer or a small engineering shop, you can go to them. and you can say this is what I want, and they can make those for you very cheaply. Well, as cheap as building materials at the moment, steel, wood, concrete, everything is very, very expensive right now, but you can get them made very, very durable. They'll last you literally for decades and decades. Very simple for those to make. Just give them specifications and they will make them for you within a day or two if you can get their free time. So don't go buying them if you don't have to. You can get someone to make them. Fred Bernier 14 is saying, do you think your strength gains will be impeded by your weight cut? So someone else also asked how I was planning on losing weight and gaining strength at the same time. Good question. As we often talk about not worrying about gaining strength while you're losing weight. In my particular scenario, I'm coming back from a period of heavy detraining, so very, very detrained, the most I've been detrained in a few years, and with good reason. It was very beneficial. So while I'm cutting weight, I'm coming back from a period of detraining, and I'm also regaining strength. Now, I've regained my strength in my squat literally twice a year for the last 5 years almost. So it's a very, very particular skill I would have. It's muscle memory. The more you train, the longer you train, and the stronger you get, the better this skill will be and the easier it will get each time. So for me, that muscle memory is not the same as gaining top end strength. So I'm not going from 106 kilos to 98 kilos and trying to squat from 290 to 320. What I'm going for is 106 to, right now, probably 220, maybe even more now, but say at the start of this particular training block, we're going from like a 220 squat on a solid day where I grind it out to back to like a 250 over the course of a few weeks. So that 250 is still only like 80 odd % of my all-time max, which I've had for years, and it's something I've done, I don't know how many times I've squatted 250, a lot I would imagine. So I'm not really gaining strength, I'm just getting back to a particular position. So would I be able to do this and get north of 320 and get down to 98? Maybe if I took an enormous amount of performance enhancing drugs, that would certainly be possible. Would that be kind of stupid? I would probably think so, but depending on what your goals were. But right now I don't need to worry about that. I'm literally just regaining strength quite easily, especially as I'm not doing a lot of snatch, clean, jerk due to the finger. This strength will be gained back even easier because I don't have other focuses. So it's just jiu-jitsu and strength training. So it's not really, there's nothing really special about this. Literally me doing multiple squat sessions a week is as nuanced as I need to get this. Just progressively increase the weight for sets and reps and I'll get back very, very easily. Would I, for example, when I get to 250 at 98 and I want to get to like maybe 280 at 98 or something like that, will I have to put a bit of effort into thought? Abso-freaking-lutely. And that would be a different scenario. But between now and then, just get back to training, get back to squatting multiple times a week, and it will get there itself. Good question. Salama is saying he's having cold goat milk after practice. I hope there's something beneficial. Feels good anyways. I'm going to say Antti is Finnish. I think that's a Finnish name. Or it could be a Norwegian name or Swedish. It's going to say it's a Scandinavian name for sure. Cold goat milk sounds incredibly unpalatable in terms of unpalatable things. But if you feel good, then I think you should keep doing it, Antti. Alright guys, thanks for the questions. Interesting that you were listening to what I was saying and you're thinking about it. I do appreciate everyone who watches them and leaves comments and likes. Very, very meaningful, and I do really appreciate it. And I will get you guys that rehab, prehab, corrective exercise video I've been doing. And yeah, any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll get to those as well if there's enough of them. Thanks guys.